Welcome to Angelo's Tennis. And I'm going to try to go down memory lane here, and I want to talk about a guy who contacted me named Tim Wilkison. And if you don't know the name Tim Wilkison, I'll put his bio up on the screen. He was a professional tennis player. I'm not sure the bio's there. I think he was in the top 100. And I want to talk about another guy named Jim Lavender. So first, I think it was Jim Lavender. I had my club. I was still learning, not so much, always learning about tennis, but I was learning about the world and the people in the world at the time. And I was in my second year that I had this club, that I rented this space. And it was second year out of 3 or 4. And the second year was really good. And I worked my ass off. I hustled my ass off. And for what I had in me, I hustled, and I got that club really rocking and rolling in the second year. It was a really good year for me. And despite that, I still was unsure of what was going to happen. You know, the summer, when I say it was a good year, the summers were still rough. A good year meaning the time between September and, say, March or April was really good, the winter season. And I still was unsure if it was going to work, the business was going to work for my vision. And so I was occasionally reaching out and applying for different tennis clubs, different positions. And there was this one in North Carolina I applied for. It was in a little town called Washington, North Carolina. And in this town, it's like a beach town, and there's no tennis there. It's the only tennis club there, and it was an abandoned tennis club. And it's pretty nice clay courts. And this guy, Jim Lavender, contacted me, and he wanted me to come down there and run this or reopen this tennis club. I don't know the deal or how he got into this, but he was working it. And he see, when you start doing something like I did, you get attention. See, I didn't understand this either. I was getting more attention for jobs than I would get before, but it was only people that saw what I did, and that sparked their interest because that's what they needed. They needed someone who could come in and start their own little business, essentially. So he wanted me to come down to this little club. I don't even think it's open right now. And you know, I had my doubts and I was nervous, but I was excited. I was like, well, this could be an opportunity. And the more I looked into it, I was like, this ain't gonna work. I was looking at the town. There was I'm exaggerating. I don't even remember. It was like 20,000 people, and I was like, no, you're gonna have to go down there and hustle, and it's gonna be nothing like what you've worked for. It's gonna be the typical tennis pro hustle, which I don't want to do. I knew I didn't want to do it before I even started. I knew I didn't want to do it. So I started to figure that out, and he's calling me. He's following up. I can show you the emails, you know, to make this more interesting maybe, but we're going back and forth, and he's like, I'm on the phone with him. I'm showing him like my doubt. He's like, I think you got some kind of mental illness. At the end of it, he's saying that because I kept going back and forth. Like, okay, I'll come down. Like, no, I don't want to come down. And that back and forth, you know, created what he perceived as a mental illness. And eventually, that was it. But he was like following me up hard, giving him his whole bio, like his credibility and all this. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? I'm not trying to ruin my life, at least for the time being. Because remember, I'm a guy who has a little bit of money, or not that much money, and I've already worked really hard for something that is kind of working. There's kind of something there that is exciting, that's needed, and it works for me in my life. So that kind of fell through. And it was a very smart decision. As I said, I don't think that, you know, not too much longer, he was no longer there. There's nothing there. Very difficult deal. And it would be a very similar situation that what I was dealing with personally, where I was at there. My personal life would have sucked. And which is another thing I might get into in a later video among all this, or throughout all this. So, and this Lavender guy, he had a daughter who played for LSU for a year or two, and then she went somewhere else. She didn't have a she didn't have a ranking. I'll put that up on the screen. She wasn't even listed on tennisrecruiting.net. I don't even know how much USTA she played, which is interesting. Then another job came up around the same time. This is where it gets interesting. Tim Wilkison calls me, and this guy tells me, he says, who he is, etc. And I look him up. I'm like, okay, this is legit. He wants me to come down there and stay at his house. These guys are giving me it's not a big deal, but he's like, you can stay, for the money and all that, to come down and visit for the interview. You can stay at my place. And I still turned it down. And that one I regretted a little bit. But that one, see, the thing is, what was difficult about that is I had to give up the money that I was making for that week at my club. And this Lavender guy told me, because this is what they do, this is the way they think, and I didn't think like that back then. He was like, we'll just get another tennis pro to come in there and take your spot. I'm like, no one's coming in here and take my spot. The customers ain't going to come back, because I had set up a very unique niche on purpose so that I stood out, that no one could copy me. And in some ways it's smart, and in some ways it's stupid when it comes to the tennis industry. But I did that on purpose. And actually, there was no way. I wasn't going to do it any other way. So it just worked out like that. But there was no one going to come through and take my place, because the customers would have been totally different from what they expected. And what he didn't understand is the customers a lot of them weren't even typical tennis customers. They would never go to the traditional tennis club because they wouldn't be interested in it. The kids would leave in 2 days. So there's different types of kids. We're talking about kids that they don't have a background in tennis. Their parents didn't play tennis. They don't know anything about tennis. They're just trying different sports. So I knew that, and that wasn't going to happen. So it was more than just the cost of going down there and the hotel and all. That wasn't just that. It was giving up, potentially, if it was December, we're talking about $3,000 in a week of revenue. It just couldn't happen. So, and all that forward momentum as well. So this Lavender guy, he's got a pretty good reputation as well, at least on paper. He sounds like a Balotelli, and I'm not going to get into what I know is what's really going on here, because I think it's way too deep for this channel. But I just looked him up, and I see he's coaching at some he's coaching at some Christian college, and he has on his bio and all this stuff about him being a Christian and stuff like that. And it's interesting because this whole lifestyle of tennis coaching, there's a lot of Christians, there's a lot of Christianity, there's a lot of thoughts and beliefs and ideas that are similar to Christianity, and has to me, this, and I'm going to tie this back around to the situation that I was in. It has a lot to do with this dream world, this fantasy world. And this is why coaches, this is my part of the reason why coaches fall into this, because almost all tennis coaches and a lot of players, it's not all the players, but probably pretty much the coaches, a lot of the players fall into this category where they're in this dreamy, dreamy world, traveling, learning, teaching, playing games. This all kind of falls in the same category. And Christians have this as well. And this is why when you see coaches like this is why they get it wrong, because they don't have that real hard, practical, I'm going to look at the hard reality of it. Because that's the opposite. They're going to get real localized out of fantasy world and into reality. The distance, and then dial it in. That's why we have players like Roger Federer and Djokovic amongst others that are they're very obsessive over the details. And I'm not going to get into what the details really are, because that's a whole nother video. But that's why they have a combination of the two. And I bring this Lavender guy because it's interesting that I saw that he was really into Christianity and all that. And I grew up Catholic, and I feel like around religions in general, there's this sense of hope and non-reality, the afterworld, etc. And that can creep into the real world that we live in right now. Oh, that's fine. The afterworld, where we came from, etc. That's all great, but that's not what we're living in right now. And the reason why that's relevant, because it comes back to what I was trying to do in my local community. I was taking this dream, this vision, the learning, the traveling, I used to do, like, I had this thing called the Junior World Tennis Tour that I offered these kids. I called my program the Junior Tennis World Tour or whatever, and bringing that sense of dreaminess and travel, world travel to the local community and making it exciting and fantastical. But these guys, if you've been watching my channel, this kind of relates to that too. These guys that live that life, I don't live that life. Like I said, I dabbled in it and I brought it back to my local community. And to be honest, if I had a preference of what to do, that's what I would do. I'd rather have that in the local community. I would not rather live that life of being, not to say I wouldn't, maybe in certain circumstances, but I wouldn't want their life. And what I mean by that they lived that life. They were born into, like Tim Wilkison, born into that life where he becomes a professional tennis player at a young age, travels the world, etc. And then he's in it. He's in that life. And he has to kind of go back and dial it back in and get into the details, because he's coming from that outside perspective. Like, he's living the dream life. And that's why I think oftentimes these guys, these bigger coaches, these bigger names aren't that, a player might not think that they're that good, or you see players jumping around from coach to coach. Why would they do that? They're not getting what they need. These guys are already made it. They're already in it. They have no reason to get into the details and get it right. They just don't. They don't have to. They can use their name. They can say, I'm Tim Wilkison. Come play with me. I'll coach you, etc. So, I don't know, this video is kind of jumbled around. I don't know if anyone really will get this. I think it's just me telling some of my story that I find interesting. And it's interesting that these two guys too, like I don't think I mentioned this, but on their website, this Lavender guy is actually on his Wilkison's website now. So that when I talked to both of them, it was two separate incidences. I don't know if they even were together at the time, and now they're together. The tennis community is small. When you get out there, it's a small world. When you're doing something like I'm doing on this video, I really don't care. Like, all of these guys are going to see this. At some point, they're all going to see it. And I don't care. Because like I said, I don't want to live that life. I don't like it. I don't respect it. Obviously, you see what I talk about on the channel. It is what it is. It's not a matter of really disrespect. It is what it is. I'm describing from my view, my perspective, my experience. I'm describing the way it works. That's all I'm doing. And I'm speaking it into the camera. So, yeah, it's interesting that those two came together. And as I said, like birds of a feather, as the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. And that's the way of the world. So, have a great day.